The mall buzzed with the usual Tuesday afternoon energy. Shoppers moved from store to store, their bags swinging by their sides, while the hum of conversations filled the air. It was a scene of organized chaos, a familiar rhythm that played out every week. Teenagers laughed, music blared from hidden speakers, the scent of pretzels hung heavy in the air, the food court was bustling with people lining up for their favorite fast food, the aroma of freshly baked goods mixed with the savory smell of pizza and burgers. My friends Sarah and Mark and I joked about the cheesy slogans on some t-shirts, our biggest worry which pizza place to hit up for dinner. We wandered through the aisles, pointing out ridiculous items and laughing at our own jokes. Suddenly the ground shuddered. People stopped, glanced around, confused. The laughter and chatter died down as everyone tried to understand what was happening. It was as if the entire mall had taken a collective breath, waiting for the next moment to unfold. A low rumble vibrated through the air like a distant truck engine amplified 1,000 times. The sound was unsettling, a deep, resonant noise that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Laughter died down, replaced by a nervous hum. People exchanged worried glances, their faces reflecting the unease that was spreading through the crowd. The once lively atmosphere had turned tense and uncertain.
What was that? The question hung in the air, unspoken by many but felt by all. Sarah asked, her brow furrowed. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of the collective anxiety.
Mark, always the joker, chuckled nervously. Earthquake, maybe? He tried to keep his tone light, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his fear. California's due for another one. It was a fact we all knew, living in a state where the ground could shift at any moment, but his face was pale, his eyes darting around anxiously. No one laughed. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and it was far from funny. The air crackled with tension. It felt like the calm before a storm, a moment of eerie stillness that promised something big was about to happen. We weren't in California anymore. The familiar surroundings of the mall seemed to blur and shift, replaced by an unfamiliar landscape. We were somewhere else, somewhere terrifying and unknown. The sense of dread was palpable, and we knew that our lives were about to change in ways we couldn't yet comprehend. Another tremor, stronger this time, sent shivers up my spine. The ground beneath me felt unstable, as if it could give way at any moment. I could hear the low rumble growing louder, a sound that seemed to come from the very core of the earth. It was a reminder of nature's raw power, a force that could not be controlled or predicted. Displays in nearby stores rattled, a few trinkets falling to shatter on the floor. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the air, adding to the growing sense of unease. Shelves shook violently and items tumbled down, creating a chaotic scene. It was as if the world around us was coming apart at the seams. The murmuring voices rose in volume, morphing from curiosity to fear. People began to panic. A woman screamed. A child cried. The atmosphere shifted dramatically, from a normal day at the mall to a scene of utter chaos. Fear was palpable, spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Everyone was looking for an escape, a way to get to safety. The once familiar sounds of the mall, the pop music, the chatter, the clatter of dishes, were swallowed whole by a wave of raw terror. The noise of panic was deafening, drowning out everything else. It was a stark contrast to the normal hustle and bustle, a reminder of how quickly things can change.
Mark grabbed my arm, his face white. His grip was tight, almost painful, a reflection of his fear. He looked at me with wide eyes, silently pleading for reassurance, but I had none to give. We were both caught in the same terrifying situation, unsure of what to do next. We need to get out of here. The urgency in his voice was clear. We couldn't stay in the mall any longer, it was too dangerous. We had to find a way out, and fast. The crowd around us was growing more frantic by the second, making it harder to move.
We pushed through the growing crowd, fear lending us speed. Every step was a struggle, as people jostled and shoved in their desperation to escape. The fear on their faces mirrored our own, a collective expression of terror. It was a fight for survival, and we were all in it together. People shoved, desperate to escape, their faces contorted in panic. The air was thick with tension, and every movement felt like a battle. It was a chaotic scene with everyone trying to reach the exits at once. The sense of urgency was overwhelming, driving us all forward. A man stumbled, falling to the ground, his cries lost beneath the trampling feet. It was a horrifying sight, a reminder of how dangerous the situation had become. People were so focused on their own escape that they didn't notice him, or perhaps they simply couldn't stop. It was every person for themselves. The exit doors loomed ahead, a beacon of hope in the chaos. They represented safety, a way out of the nightmare we were trapped in, but reaching them was no easy task. The crowd surged forward, everyone desperate to get through. It was a race against time, and we could only hope to make it out unscathed. Outside, the air hummed with a strange energy. People spilled out of the mall, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. The sky, usually a cheerful blue, had darkened to a menacing gray, swirling clouds gathering like an omen.
What's happening? Sarah's voice trembled, barely audible above the rising panic.
Whispers snaked through the crowd, some murmurings about earthquakes, others about terrorist attacks. But deeper, more primal fear lurked in the eyes of those around us. This wasn't like anything we'd ever seen, anything we could explain. It felt biblical. A blood-curdling scream ripped through the air, all eyes shot upwards. The sky, that once familiar canvas of blue, had split open. A jagged tear, like a wound across the heavens, bled blinding light. The air crackled with energy, raising goosebumps on my skin. From the gaping wound poured a sound, a chorus of voices so powerful, so ethereal it seemed to reverberate through my very bones. Terror, raw and primal, seized me. I wanted to look away, to run, to hide, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. The light intensified, bathing everything in its unearthly glow. People shielded their eyes, cries erupting from those brave enough to keep looking. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. This was wrong. This was beyond wrong. This was the impossible made real. The world as we knew it was gone. We were witnessing something beyond comprehension, something both beautiful and terrifying. I clung to Sarah and Mark, my breath catching in my throat. These were beings of immense power, their faces unreadable, their beauty tinged with an alien quality that sent shivers down my spine. But in their eyes, I saw a terror that mirrored my own. These were not the comforting angels of stained glass windows. Angels! Some cried, falling to their knees in worship. Whispers turned to shouts. They descended slowly, their forms shifting, shimmering, as if woven from the very light that poured from the sky. Silhouettes began to emerge from the light, figures too perfect, too beautiful to be human. One by one, people began to rise. It was as if an invisible force had taken hold of them, lifting them gently but firmly off the ground. The air was filled with gasps and murmurs of disbelief as more and more people started to ascend. They floated upwards, drawn towards the light like moths to a flame. The light was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic, and it seemed to call to them, beckoning them closer with an irresistible allure. Some went willingly, their faces filled with ecstatic joy. They reached out towards the light, their expressions serene and blissful, as if they had found the answer to a question they had been asking all their lives. Others screamed, their hands outstretched, their faces contorted with fear and desperation. They tried to grab onto anything they could, their eyes wide with terror as they were pulled away from the ground, trying desperately to cling to the earth, to those they loved. They held onto each other, their grips tight and unyielding, but it was no use. The force was too strong, and one by one they were torn apart. It was chaos, pure and simple. The air was filled with a cacophony of screams, cries, and shouts. People were floating, some in peace, others in panic, creating a scene of utter pandemonium.
A woman next to me, her eyes wide with terror, cried out for her child, her voice breaking with desperation. She reached out, her fingers trembling, trying to grasp the air where her child had been, who hovered in mid-air, a look of blissful peace on his face. He seemed unaware of the chaos around him, his eyes closed, a serene smile playing on his lips as he floated higher and higher. A man clawed at the ground, his fingers digging into the asphalt, his nails breaking and bleeding. He screamed in agony and frustration, his voice raw and hoarse, but the ground offered no solace. His screams swallowed by the unearthly chorus from above. The sky seemed to echo with the cries of the ascending, a haunting symphony that filled the air and sent shivers down my spine.
Then I felt it. A strange sensation, like a gentle tug at first, almost like a whisper against my skin. It was subtle but unmistakable, and it sent a jolt of fear through me. A tug, gentle at first, then insistent, pulling me upwards. My feet began to lift off the ground, and I felt a rush of panic. I tried to resist, to fight against the pull, but it was no use. My feet left the ground. I was floating, rising higher and higher, and the world below began to blur. The faces of those I loved grew distant, and I felt a pang of sorrow. I reached for Sarah, for Mark, but my fingers grasped only air. They were just out of reach, their faces filled with fear and confusion as they watched me ascend. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced through me. I was leaving them behind. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt a wave of despair. I was being taken away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. My last view of Earth was of Sarah and Mark, their faces contorted in fear and disbelief reaching for me, their voices lost in the cacophony of screams and unearthly music. Then, I was engulfed by the light. The sensation was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was pain and pleasure, fear and ecstasy, all rolled into one overwhelming wave. I felt myself changing, my humanity dissolving, replaced by something else. And then silence. The light was gone, the screams were gone, the earth was gone. I was alone, suspended in a void, the echoes of what I once knew fading like whispers on the wind. Where was I? What had I become? Time, in this place, had no meaning. I drifted, alone with my thoughts, replaying the events that led me here, searching for answers that remained elusive. Had I been chosen? Saved? Or was this some cruel cosmic joke, a punishment for sins I didn't even know I'd committed? The faces of Sarah and Mark haunted me, their expressions of terror seared into my memory. Were they still alive? What had become of them in that world I'd left behind? Guilt gnawed at me. Why them, and not me? What had I done to deserve this? I closed my eyes, but there was no escape from the questions, from the emptiness that stretched before me like a vast, uncharted sea. Was this heaven, or was it something far more terrifying? As I floated in the vast nothingness, a chilling realization washed over me. This wasn't heaven. This was emptiness. This was existence stripped bare, devoid of the love, the laughter, the pain that made life worth living. I would trade it all in a heartbeat to be back on that chaotic street, to feel the warmth of Sarah's hand in mine, to hear Mark's laughter, even if it meant facing whatever horrors awaited us there. For what is existence without those we love? What is eternity without a hand to hold, a shoulder to cry on, a heart to share the burden? This wasn't salvation. This was a prison, a gilded cage in a cold and empty universe. I was alone, and that was the truest hell of all.
Suddenly, the void around me shifted. I found myself standing before a blinding light. Judgment Day had arrived. The light coalesced into a figure of unimaginable presence and power. God. His voice thundered, yet carried a warmth that made my soul quiver. "My son," he said, "I've brought you here to warn others of what's to come. Go, warn my people." With those words, a snap echoed through the emptiness. I jolted awake, back in my bed. My heart pounded as if trying to break free from my chest. The divine message burned within me, a mission I could not ignore. I began to repent, tears streaming down my face, and rushed out of my room to find my family. "Repent! Repent!" I yelled, my voice breaking but filled with urgency and conviction. The video fades out as I ran out of my bedroom, the weight of the divine warning heavy on my shoulders.